Welcome to the podcast on negotiation. And today, with a very special guest and a very special topic. Today, we're going to talk about trust, especially in the context of intercultural negotiations. And our guest is a very special, person who unites two worlds. Yes, the world of academia and the world of praxis. Mariusz Sikorski, who works in business and at the same time has studied negotiations from various angles, and in his latest paper, Trust in the Context of Intercultural Negotiations, in which he, with his co-authors, reviews a lot of academic work on this topic, analyzes what we know about trust and what we still need to find out. Mariusz, welcome to the podcast on negotiation. Great to have you with us.
Yes, thank you, Rami, and hi, everyone. So first of all, I'm happy to be here today to talk with you about this very interesting topic of trust and intercultural negotiation. The basis for our discussion is the systematic review, which we have published in the beginning of this year. And so thank you very much for having me today.
Very welcome, Mariusz. And by the way, guys, it's published in the Negotiation and Conflict Management Research Journal, which I warmly recommend you guys have a look at if you're bored or would like to find out more about various aspects of negotiation. But before we start, Mariusz, with the specifics of your paper, I think it makes a lot of sense to lay the foundations for everything else and start by defining what trust is. So could you help us? I think it's one of those concepts where we have an intuitive feeling of what it is, but might find it hard to put it in words. Mariusz, how would you define trust?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so let's look at a typical definition that is used in trust, but I would also suggest to look into the different trust terms that we have, because some of them they are used sometimes interchangeably, but also they are somehow related to each other, like the different types of trust, dimensions of trustworthiness, or also from which trust levels, for example, relational trust can evolve. So I would suggest to look briefly into this models and to look into a common definition. So, for example, if we would look at a definition, it would be like, trust is defined as the willingness to make yourself vulnerable by revealing information that a negotiation counterpart could use against you. So what is crucial to take out of this definition is that I'm already saying that, but we will elaborate also in our discussion today, that it is really Western-oriented definition, because when you look at this definition, it is really saying or focusing on the information sharing and on the openness. And we will see also throughout our discussion that it is very Western-oriented. And what do I mean with Western-oriented? So this is mainly US, North America, as well as Europe. So this is how it is mainly defined, and this is also what we have seen in the literature, that most of the literature really focuses on Western cultures, but also on East Asia, like Japan and China. But we will also see later what's the difference. So as I mentioned, I would like also to look into these different models that we have in trust. So one of them is the different types of trust defined by McAllister. So we have this cognition-based trust as well as affect-based trust. So the cognition would be also going into this direction, like information sharing or competence or reliability. And if we would look at affect-based trust, it's more the relational aspect or the goodwill, the friendship, etc.
Because we usually trust our moms, not because we negotiate with them, but because our dads, spouses, and partners, or friends, not because we constantly negotiate with them, but because we love them. Is that not the essence of that type of trust?
Yes, absolutely. So that's important. That is also how, for example, in the context of negotiation, the different cultures focuses or what is relevant. Because in some cultures it's more the relationship aspect, as in the family. So like Latin American cultures, they, for example, really focuses on the relationship aspect and the trust. So it would be the affect-based trust. And cultures like Western or East Asia would then focus on cognition-based trust. And one other type of trust that is also commonly defined or described is institutional trust, and that is also very important to mention, because later on we will also see that in some cultures there is the focus on institutional trust, like for example in East Asia, because when you are intraculturally, you can expect in tight cultures, and we will also see then what is this cultural dimension meaning. But you can see here that, for example, people follow social norms, follow rules and regulation, what would mean that you don't really need to trust interpersonally, but it's more the institutional trust, so that you can expect someone to really be trustworthy, or to implement or really realize that action that he or she promised. So institutional trust, we will see later on why this is also crucial when looking at, especially how we compare intracultural to intercultural interactions. But when we add one other trust model, this would be the AB model, right? So the ability, benevolence, integrity. So this would be the criteria of trustworthiness that would then goes into one of these types that we mentioned. So it would be ability, like more the competence aspect, benevolence, do you want a win-win solution? Do you want an integrative outcome, or more a distributive one, which would be more competitive outcome? And the integrity would be like, are we going to be ethically, are we following rules somehow? So are we negotiating on a fair basis? So these are the trust terms that are used frequently, as well as when we look at Levitsky and Butler's trust development stages. We can see that they are understanding trust as a linear concept. So it starts like with a calculus-based trust. This would mean that, like we have mentioned already with the rules or regulations, so people would trust the other because they expect that if they would not fulfill what they promised in the interaction, in the negotiation, they would have high costs of, for example, sanctions or punishment. And therefore, this would be the first stage, calculus-based trust. This would develop to knowledge-based trust. So if we have several transactions, if we know each other better, so that would mean this would be the knowledge-based trust, and this would develop into from a rational to a more relational aspect, like identification-based trust, and this would be again the relational aspect. But what I wanted also to emphasize is the Western-oriented idea, right? Because when we look at the different other cultures, for example, you really need to have already a relationship or a certain trust level before you even start a negotiation or a business. So that means that it is not linear in intercultural negotiation, but really a non-linear and other focus trust. So that's how we can. It was a more extensive description or definition of trust, but it's really important, I think, in the intercultural interaction to define it properly. Right?
Absolutely, and as I've been listening to your answer, I've been wondering about that cross-cultural negotiations. They usually start from different levels depending on the intensity of this triangle that you described: institutional, affective, and cognitive. Right? Typically, in negotiation with people we meet for the first time, we develop some sort of a cognitive type of trust. But at the same time, I think the speed and the would be my hypothesis. The speed and the willingness to develop this type of trust depends on the level of institutional and effective trust that the individuals have enjoyed in their lives. Meaning, probably people would be willing and more inclined to trust someone on a cognitive basis if they've already experienced that institutional trust is useful and important, and if they've already grown up in an environment where effective trust was the norm. What do you think about that, Mariusz?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when we look at the different cultures, there is a certain difference of also history and how social values and norms are defined and also lived, right? Because some, as you mentioned, it's more the focus on affect-based trust, so it's the relationship aspect, because also there is a tendency not to have, for example, government or historical developments that show you that you can really trust a counterpart. So this is the difference why there's really the need for interpersonal trust. And in some other cultures, it's really the institutional trust. So where you can trust because of the government, because of rules, because of social norms. And I think what is also very important here is to take this cultural dimensions of tightness and looseness, because this defines also actually how cultures differ in regards to norms deviation, right? So for example, tight cultures, they are strictly following norms because otherwise it would be sanctioned or punished. And others like loose cultures, it's like the terms is saying it, right? It's loose and deviations are more tolerated. And this is exactly, and I think also what would be relevant now is to mention a very important cultural definition or distinction. What we also described in the paper and used is the high trust and low trust, right? Because this comes actually into this direction. So what we have seen, so for example, from data, from a survey or a global research project, which is named the World Value Survey, right? So they are providing data from for different types of questions. So they are asking people or participants, hundreds of thousands of people, and one of the things they're asking is the trust question. So trust metrics that we could also use in order to enhance our literature review. Right, so this is also, so the high trust, low trust differentiation is also in alignment with Jean Brett's studies. So I think she has done great research in this type of negotiations, intercultural, as well as some trust studies. But yes, so how do we define high trust and low trust, and which cultures are these? So high trust cultures, we have seen from the trust metrics and the studies of Jean Brett that this is these are, well, Western cultures as well as East Asia. And when we look at low trust cultures, these are then all of the others, so Latin America, South Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, as well as Africa. So that means, so it doesn't mean that low trust and high trust means that the other person is less trustworthy. So this is not how the definition works. It works like the intention to trust is less. So that means, for example, if we look at Western cultures, so you trust a counterpart until the counterpart proves to be untrustworthy. So it's the swift trust assumption. And what was also possible to see from the trust metrics was really the differentiation between intracultural and intercultural interaction. So what does it mean? It means that all of the other cultures, so besides the Western cultures, as I mentioned, where there is the swift trust assumption, so all of the others, they tend to trust a counterpart less than, so a counterpart of another culture less than their in-group members. And that's, I think, very relevant to distinct high trust and low trust cultures.
This was like the best introduction on trust on a general level that one could ever possibly imagine. Let's go down deeper into the specific context of negotiation. Why is trust important in the context of negotiation? What does it help us? Does it make it more risky? Does it help us get better results? How do you see it, Mariusz?
Mm. Yes, so when we started the research on intercultural negotiations, we quite quickly were able to see that trust is a crucial element, and several scholars have also emphasized their importance. So I like very much a quote from Druckmann and Herring, because they are saying that trust may be the most important element in negotiation. So I would say this is very important, and I would describe also why. So let me mention two comments. So one would be that if we are in a negotiation situation where we try to negotiate about terms, about conditions, about different things, if we look at politics or if we look at business, right? But actually, this is a promise to fulfill a certain action in future, right? So if you cannot really trust someone with whom you are negotiating, you're going out of the room or you're standing up of the negotiation table, and you don't know if this will actually happen. So this is very important, I think, to emphasize trust here. As well as saying that, normally there's not a one-time interaction, because normally if in businesses or as well as in politics, normally you want to have a long-term relationship. So you meet the counterpart several times, and so you need a certain basis, you need a certain trust level. And this goes also into the direction that, I would also add to the trust definition that we had, and normally this is overlooked. So, is it worth actually engaging with someone else? I think this is also a very important element.
Okay, so there's a commitment aspect with respect to the future. There's a certain affective aspect to it as well, but there's also an aspect of problem solving, I think, right, which is important in this context, meaning to what extent can I rely on the preferences which are revealed by my partner? Meaning, if I make a certain assumption on what is a wise outcome in a particular negotiation, the basis for that assessment is are my preferences and my understanding of the preferences of my negotiation partner, right? So the ability to rely on what's being revealed in terms of the ranking of preferences or the utility that the partner has defines our ability to find wise solutions or more efficient solutions, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because so if we look at such negotiations situation, it is like we have seen also in the definition. So if you would reveal information, you could make yourself vulnerable. So that means that there needs also to be a certain trust level in order to honestly and openly share those priorities, right? And in order to really try to have an optimized outcome, which is when we look at also the negotiation challenge, right? So what are the criteria, how successful a negotiator has negotiated? This is also the value creation, right? And this is especially important. So if you have a certain trust level, you can create value. Otherwise, the two counterparts would try to maximize their own value, which would minimize actually the whole sum of the potential.
Yes, exactly. So there are many reasons. There are many reasons why trust is important in negotiation. So now let's dive a little bit deeper into your project. Yes, already in the abstract, you mentioned the hard work that you've done while trying to find out more about it, which means you've reviewed 600 papers, decided to focus on 48, and based on these 48, you've produce certain results that we'll discuss in a second. What were the criteria no, first of all, let us step back. Why did you decide to do so much work? Yes, and then I can also follow up with the next question: is how did you decide to reduce from 600 to 48? But first of all, I'd like to find out more about the key event or key aspect that somehow drew your attention to this research topic.
Mhm. Yes, so I would say it is because of also what you mentioned, my practical experience, and also my interest in intercultural negotiations. So also from my experience, I had several negotiations with different cultures, like in East Asia or other cultures, and we had also this questions or the interest to see how can negotiation outcomes can be optimized, as well as because we have seen that in intercultural interactions there is especially the relational aspect. So that means how do trustworthiness criteria differ between the different cultures. And so as I have mentioned, we have seen quite quickly that trust is a very important element, and so we wanted to do research on it, especially because we have also seen that there is not yet a review like that, especially also not with this theoretical integration that we did in order to have really a conceptual model and some statements. Also, although we know that there is still a lot of research that we need to do in this research field.
Are you? I remember when you took part in our negotiation competition. You described yourself as a trusting negotiator. Yes. Are you? Did that play a role in the selection of your research topic? That you are more or less trusting or trustworthy individual yourself, or was it a purely research based decision?
No, I would say it is exactly like that, because I try to really maximize the value for both sides. I think then we really optimizes the options and possibilities, and in the end, when we build a relationship, then we can have a long-term successful relationship, and that's why I have also turned myself the trusting negotiator.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. And it's also an important signal also to the negotiation partners. Guys, I'm choosing this, the name of my team, to be trusting negotiator or negotiators, because I want to do a certain type of negotiation, right? And I give you a signal. I'm ready for it. Would you like to do it this way, right? Okay, so let's come back to the reduction from 600 to 48. How did you? Can you guide us through this step? What were the criteria that you used for this reduction?
Yes, so it was quite challenging to really find the relevant literature to our research questions or to the aims we wanted to really fulfill. So one of them was really we wanted to look at the differentiation of intra and intercultural negotiations. So one of the important aspects which we will also talk about, I think, is adaptation. And we wanted to focus on trust and negotiations. And when we take these three terms and look in the different databases, then we have results from different fields, like when people cope with certain illnesses. This is also something where people negotiate, where there's can be different cultures as well as trust, right? So we needed to exclude those papers. So it was quite challenging to already exclude those papers to 600, and then we needed to go to each paper, to the abstracts and titles, and to exclude for the relevance, really. And then we found a really relevant paper that helped us to build the findings, the conceptual model, and this was the procedure.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. This reduction, guys, if you're not scientists, this reduction is absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary literature reviews, because literature reviews are supposed to, let's say, give a very good idea of the knowledge, what we know about a particular aspect. But it has to be confined within the limits of those aspects that are to be analyzed. So, as I was preparing for our discussion, when I looked at your paper and I sort of reflected upon it, um, similarity came to my mind. Yes, because you're probably not without the reason. You're not looking only at trust in negotiation, but the title of your paper emphasizes trust in intercultural or cross-cultural negotiations. And I was wondering, what would be the complicating factors in that context, and think that and kind of thought about similarity. Yeah, we know for a couple of decades already, we've known that similarity fosters trust and makes it easier for us to build trust between individuals who are similar. And in cross-cultural contexts, it emphasizes explicitly the differences. And I was wondering whether this similarity aspect, the cultural proximity of negotiation partners, whether it has an impact, based on your research, based on the papers you guys have read and analyzed, whether the cultural proximity has a similar impact on trust building in cross-cultural negotiation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And I would say also this is one of the key aspects or key conclusions also out of our paper, is to say why is it crucial to become a sort of extended in-group member. And this is exactly because then you increase the similarity. So I would say it is quite interesting to look into the different theories that we have also used. So I would briefly try to explain how we also develop the conceptual model, right? Because there we actually see why similarity matters and why it is not only relevant for negotiations, but also other types of relationships or situations. So, for example, we we looked at social identity theory. So if we look at this, especially people, so when we negotiate with another person, there's this interpersonal perspective, right? But if we go into intercultural interactions, we need to extend it by the intergroup perspective, because there's somehow an in-group member and out-group member, right? So the other culture, they tend to be the out-group members then, because they are in a different culture. That would be, as the theory is called, social identity, that the counterpart or the out-group member could be a threat to my identity, or at least this theory leads to an in-group favoritism. So what is important here also to emphasize that, so we favor our in-group members somehow, but it doesn't really mean that we have an out-group hate. So this is not what comes in parallel. And this is extremely important for why we can become an extended in-group member, right? And what could we do? So if we look at the other theories that were needed to integrate those in order to build the conceptual model, it's like when we look at the integrated threat theory of prejudice, it means that because of this distinction of out-group and in-group members, there can be a perceived threat. And this can lead to actually prejudices about the counterpart. So because of, they could be because of experiences in the past, or they can be just because the other is different. I don't know the counterpart, I don't know the culture, and that's why it leads to perceived threat. And it is also said that this intergroup anxiety, this can also lead to the fact that intercultural interactions are so complex, right? And if we then look at the similarity attraction theory, we actually come to this point what we mentioned. So if people see the counterpart as similar, this can attract someone, and that would mean that increasing similarity could foster trust, and therefore an aim could be to become a member of an extended in-group. And that's where adaptation becomes really crucial, and adaptability, because when you adapt somehow with cultural values, norms, with your behavior, when you have cultural awareness, then this possibility to increase similarity, to reduce threats in order to foster a trustful relationship.
That's super interesting, Mariusz, and thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing this. Basically, the recommendation is that the summary is that it still holds, yes, also in cross-cultural context, and the recommendation is to become similar as much as possible, right, to each other through adaptability. But I remember this reminded me spontaneously of a seminal paper that Stephen Wise published many years ago on cross-cultural negotiations. I think before they were even fashionable, because before it was even fashionable to deal with the topic. It's called "Do as the Romans," when in Rome, do as the Romans, or something along those lines, where he said, well, if you guys negotiate with someone from a culturally distant culture, there has to be some adaptability done on your side. But I would sort of, and then he followed up with a second paper, which was, I forgot the title of the follow-up paper, which was kind of a little bit more, which gave a more sophisticated answer to this question. And let us maybe think about it together for a second. So, who is supposed to adapt to whom? Yes, is it the buyer that is supposed to adapt to the seller? Is it the seller who is supposed to adapt to the buyer? Are they supposed to adapt to something third? Right, to find the middle ground. So how does this work, right? I mean, yes, it's easy to say become a member of an extended in-group, right, or adapt to each other. But I think the devil here lies in the detail, right? Which means who is supposed to adapt to whom and why and how?
Yes, it's a very tough question, but very interesting one. And I would like to mention, some points to that. So one would be, so if we look at different cultures like high trust and low trust cultures, it tend to be the high trust Western individual that should adapt to the counterpart, especially of low trust culture. Because, he or she from the Western culture, like high trust, they assume that the counterpart is trustworthy. So that would mean that they are not really assuming someone else to adapt, right? So it would be more this individual to adapt in regards to reduce the threat that the counterpart would have, and in order to increase similarities. But what is also crucial to emphasize, and I think also this is mentioned in the paper you have mentioned as the second one, is that, a certain level of adaptation is successful, but not a substantial one. And I'll give you one example. So this was in one of the negotiation situations between different cultures. And one negotiation team, they wanted, to foster a climate of trust. And so they had to negotiate with an Asian counterpart team. And so they included an Asian origin person in their negotiation team. But what happened in the end? In the end, it was, it led to suspicion and it led to distrust. So that means that substantial adaptation in regards to the negotiation teams, but also if one would adapt too much. And I think of examples like if I would try to speak with an American accent and would talk to an American person, this would be somehow also suspicious. So that would be a substantial adaptation. Or if I would go to an Arabic country, it would wear the white robe, right? I think it's called kandura. So this would be also maybe a little bit of too much. So therefore, a moderate adaptation would be more successful than a substantial one. Because otherwise, and we could also look into the social identity theory, if there would be a substantial adaptation, this would mean that well, the identity of the counterpart could be then threatened again. So that means that we need to look at a moderate one.
That's a very good answer, Mariusz. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I know this topic is super difficult. And negotiating with the Romans, by the way, was the title of the papers. Two papers that Steve Weiss published. He was on our show a couple of episodes ago, and we talked a little bit about his work, great work in the field, which predates my interest certainly, and interest of many others. But coming back to to the topic of to our discussion. So I've been wondering, having worked in China for an extended time, my impression was that my Chinese counterparts also read the same papers and also read the same books as on how to negotiate in a culturally distant, cross-cultural context, culturally distant context. And I was wondering, at some point, this mutual adaptation, right, can lead to also to a lot of issues, right, which are caused by willingness of the parties to get closer to each other. So basically, they want to get closer to each other. They start adapting to each other, but instead of creating more trust, they end up creating less, creating threats, creating suspicions. Right? I mean, this is. I was wondering. What are your thoughts on the inverse relationship of adaptability? I know that this is something that is not mentioned in the paper yet, maybe as an avenue for further research. But I was you as an expert, I'm sure you have some thoughts on the topic of adaptability, because it's not a linear relationship, right? It has to be more sophisticated than that, which means what are your thoughts on this? What is the right level of adaptability, and on which side shall it take place?
Yes, so adaptability is very complex. When we look at the mechanism, so the adaptation, as well as how can we really adapt, so which would mean which personal traits do we need for adaptability, right? And I would say, so I would like to answer your questions with also from two perspectives. So one would be that the personal traits needed for adaptability would be, for example, cultural intelligence, would be empathy, would be the willingness really to create or to build bridges, as well as the intrinsic motivation to do so. So that would mean that it is more than just adapting, it is really also acknowledging that the counterpart can adapt, because there could be exactly those situations, as you mentioned, that both sides would adapt, and that would mean that in some of the cases you are adapting because of the assumptions that you have to the counterpart, right? So both sides are adapting because of their assumptions or their stereotypes that they have in mind. And this would lead also to situations where there is somehow a crash of these adaptation, and that would not really help, right? So, but I would say a very crucial aspect would be really to be culturally aware, and then to also behave flexibly in that situation. So really to recognize if the counterpart adapts as well. So then you would need a different adaptation again.
That's correct. That's a very interesting aspect, Mariusz. And I was thinking also about another dimension, which I'm not aware of from the literature. What I've observed in my cross-cultural negotiations, especially those with representatives of very distant cultures, especially Far East Asia, and I was wondering about the aspect of authenticity, perceived authenticity, which means I noticed that even if I had no idea how to adapt, even if I had no clue about the values of my partners, I noticed that they appreciate differences, but differences in an honest and authentic way, which means, hey, I don't know what's in your mind. I don't know what's in your head. I have no idea how you negotiate, but I'm going to do my best the way I am, the way who I am, and how I would normally do it. But please feel free to correct me if I'm making a mistake. This sort of humble authenticity I've made very good experience with, and I had a feeling that it sort of leads to respect and appreciation, much more than the how do I say, negotiating with the Romans. At least the first part of the first paper of Steve's paper, where adaptability is put into the center, either one-sided or more nuanced adaptability. I thought, what are your thoughts on authentic or remaining authentic but honest and benevolent as a replacement or substitute for adaptability?
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. This is also very relevant in some cultures, like you mentioned, so East Asia, or as well, this could be very relevant for Middle East or South Asia as well, because when you are, prepared to really accept the differences, and if you respect the uh, different cultural norms or values or beliefs, or also the other behaviors. For example, do you how do you shake hands? Is there any eye contact possible, or should you just have a short eye contact? So all of these, I think, goes into the direction, if you're authentic and if you're respecting the other cultural norms. But we could also look into the other cultures. So, or for example, East Asia. What are the other aspects that are also crucial when trying to build a trustful relationship? So, for example, like how do these cultures define how do these cultures define a relationship? So, for example, when we differ between Latin America and East Asia, we have seen that in cultures like Latin America, but also like in Middle East or South Asia, there is more the focus on a personal relationship. So that means also here that you need really to start the relationship, to build a certain trust level, before, as I mentioned also in the beginning of our discussion, before even a negotiation starts or a business. That's really very relevant to consider that in intercultural interactions. And like in East Asia, for example, the relationship shifts more to a professional relationship as well as a personal relationship, but maybe some individuals are a bit surprised that before there is a certain social gathering, and I've also experienced that in making business with China, that you need to fulfill this point of what you mentioned, being authentic, but also to really prove your competence, or to show what I mentioned also before, if you're worth engaging with. I think that is also crucial. And after this is proved, and what could help is also to take really a third party to introduce you, because that would mean that if the other party is trusted, they would only suggest you if you can be also trustworthy, right? So this is also one of the possibilities. And actually, it's if you prove the reliability and the competence, you can go into the next stage, like with the relationship aspect, especially in East Asia. So that really differs from culture to culture, and especially here, it is really relevant to adapt from one situation to another, from one culture to the other. So, right, to really consider all of these differences.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing this. Makes sense. This to look at this triangle and think about which edge of the triangle, which angle of the triangle shall we start from, right? So how do we build trust in a particular culture? What are the norms, and what is typical, and consider that in the way we structure our negotiation processes. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I was wondering about another aspect as I've been listening to you and sort of thinking about my professional career as a negotiator. I also noticed that what is happening is that cultural borders are becoming more and more fluid. Yes, meaning they sort of disappear, right? And it seems that young generation is on Instagram everywhere. Of course, the algorithm will show them different things, but there are a lot of things that are similar, right? So I don't know if someone is a fan of K-pop, that will be shown on Instagram or TikTok, not only in South Korea but also in Germany or the US or in Mexico, right? And I've been wondering whether, obviously literature reviews are backwards looking, right? So we're looking at research projects and studies that have been done in the past. But when we dare to extrapolate your great work into the future, or to analyze the present, yes, how do you see these diminishing, or let's say this cultural homogeneity, or this McDonaldization of culture around the world, right? How do you see it contributing to maybe more or less conflict in negotiation? Or meaning, is it then does it become easier to build trust in cross-cultural setting because we are more and more similar? Yes. Or is it becoming harder because we believe we are similar, but deep down inside we are completely different?
Yes, and I would say I would go into the direction of your second statement, because I would still believe that, especially well, in a world that is really globalized, and the globalization is increased throughout the last decades, right? And we are at a certain point that it is quite hard for a possibility to deglobalize. So we have seen it already, that people mentioned, well, we would go into more well, national focus, like because of the tariff politics or because of COVID. But that doesn't really happen, right? Because we are so interconnected, and in some of the countries it is even not possible, for example, to produce some certain products. So that means that we will still have the globalized world, and the aspect, as you mentioned, with going into more homogeneous culture, I would say there's a deeper layer, that we still have different values, different norms, because also when looking into multinational companies, there could be the idea that there's somehow a third culture, right? That it is not really differentiating, because when a company has different sides. But actually, when we look at one of the famous cultural studies, so Hofstede made the cultural dimension or developed them. And actually, this was made at one company, right, at IBM. So that shows that there were actually very big differences between those sides, although this was one company. And I would go also into the direction to say, if we look at the politics in different countries and see how far-right parties are voted or elected, right? So this would also maybe go into the direction that people try to keep their values and norms because of perceived threat, right? That they would become somehow one, and people maybe don't want it.
Thank you, Mariusz. We have a couple of questions. From the audience. We're not going to be able to. We'll not be able to answer all of them. But one of them is quite interesting and sort of says, well, if I'm sent somewhere to sign a contract, right, especially to East Asia or to Africa, to a culture which is relationship based, handshake based. Yes. How do you see? Is that a problem? Can that result in less trust because I'll be pushing for formalities where they would be willing or perfectly ready to work on a handshake basis? How would you resolve this dilemma?
Yes, so I would say this is actually a challenge because let us think about the situation. If you go to a certain company, for example, you try to build a relationship with an African country or African company or a company, I see East side, so maybe an East Asian company. So the focus is also, to prove competence as well as the reliability, but also build a trustful relationship. And let us assume that you have built this trustful relationship, and you would then ask for a formal contract. This could again lead the counterpart to think, why do we need it? We have already a trustful relationship.
Exactly.
We can start business without having a contract. So I would say this is really a challenge.
It is, but how do we solve it, right? Because if the salesperson comes back home, she's not going to get a bonus because the boss will say, "Hey, listen, there's no contract." So how can we make sure that the agreement will hold, right? And at the same time, when she goes back to that country and says, "Well, I'm sorry, but I need a contract," they will say, "Why do you need? Do you not trust us?" Yes. So where's a solution for a negotiator who is caught between, on the one hand, cultural norms, and on the other hand, cultural norms, but then that dictate certain company policies or procedures?
Yeah, so I would say this one option could be really to emphasize the importance for the company, just to mention that these are the requirements, or maybe try to have a really short agreement, or maybe even only a purchase order, which would mean we trust each other, but we need something to be compliant, right? So this could be, I think, a very valid argument.
So ultimately, we come back to authenticity, honesty, and truthful revelation of preferences, which I think is an underestimated. When I think about potential research topics, which usually is the last section of a research paper, then this is probably one of the things that I could imagine focusing on at some point in the future. How does perceived authenticity, say, mediate trust building, or relationship building and trust creation in between culturally distant negotiators? Any other avenues for future research, Mariusz?
Yes, I think there is still much to do in this research field. So we have understudied cultures, we have several questions in the cultures of Latin America, Africa, Middle East. There is still much to find out in regards to trust repair. So maybe one comment also here. So we have mentioned that it is very challenging to build trust between different cultures, right? And it is even more challenging to repair trust. And why is that? I think I will just mention briefly the low context and high context holds dimensions, right? So these are talking that some of the cultures are speaking or communicating more implicitly, right? Like Asian countries, for example, and that would mean that you need to read between the lines, right? So if we look at such situation when trust was violated or broken, the counterpart may not really see or recognize the trust has been broken, so they will not start any trust repairing actions. And this is where there's really a challenge in trust repair. And I think there we need also to find um, answers and to do more research.
Hey, there's a lot of work that is waiting for you, Mariusz, and your co-author. Before we wrap it up for today, my last question is always the same. It's about greatness in negotiation. That's not without the reason. I'll reveal this reason in one of the future episodes. But when you think about greatness in negotiation, who comes to your mind?
Hmm. Well, that's also a tough question. Um, so I would say two persons come in my mind actually, and I would think also that this really shows the contrast of how negotiations can be done. So the one person that I'm thinking of is Nelson Mandela, and the other is Donald Trump. So these are very different negotiators, right? So when we look at Nelson Mandela, he was really a person who tried to, well, build bridges, who was trying to adapt, who was focusing on empathy, being culturally aware. And all of these terms which I mentioned, we don't really reflect Donald Trump with those, right? So it's more like well, deal maker. It's more like power positioning, assertiveness, and this can work in situations like right, maybe more in intercultural situations, but in intercultural aspects it can be challenging, right? So it could be uh, the more or the better way to go with Nelson Mandela's strategy.
All right. You are, by the way, you are the first person in the last almost 3 years of this podcast history who has mentioned Donald Trump as an example of a great negotiator. But anyway, Nelson Mandela is someone who definitely was appreciated, someone who's mentioned very frequently. And I thank you, Mariusz, for your recommendations. Thank you for your great research at NCMR, Negotiation Conflict Management Research Journal. Congratulations on publishing your paper there. For those of you guys who have not read it, we tried our best to summarize it, but there's still much to read about in the work of Mariusz and his co-author. The paper will be linked at the end of this video or at the end of this audio on our podcasting services and on YouTube. Grab it, have a look at it, and let us know what you think in the comments. Mariusz, thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And until the next time on the podcast on negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who was with us today.
Thank you, guys. See you soon.